Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to a new episode of the Jewish People Policy Institute's Inside Analysis on the state of affairs in Israel and the Jewish world. On today's episode, we have a great interview that I did earlier today with Lord Stuart Pollock. Lord Pollock is a member of the Conservative Party, the ruling party in the UK right now, and he is also the honorary president of the Conservative Friends of Israel, basically a version in Britain of kind of what I think Americans would look at as AIPAC. It is an organization that works to create awareness about Israel's needs and to basically lobby government to be supportive of the state of Israel. He had a luncheon last week, which I was had the opportunity to attend, where 20 ministers or cabinet members of the British cabinet were present. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was there, parliamentarians. Really impressive show of force and amazing solidarity with the state of Israel. So we'll hear soon from Lord Pollock about that. And then we have a great panel with our two senior fellows from JPPI, Professor Gil Troy and Maimon. We'll be talking about the stance in Europe as well as the situation right now of anti-Semitism. If you haven't heard, it's on a bit of a rise right now. So here we go. Lord Stuart Pollock, it's great to have you on the JPPI podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Great pleasure.
So we're talking just about a week after you at CFI, the Conservative Friends for Israel, held your annual luncheon. And you really, I happened to be there. I was a guest, and it was extremely impressive, I have to say. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, and just everybody, 20 cabinet ministers, MPs from across the Conservative Party. But before we talk about the specific event, what I find to be really interesting throughout the war since October 7th is just how this government has stood steadfastly by Israel, at Israel's side, in a way that I think surprised to some extent Israelis.
Well, maybe I didn't do a very good job over the years, because the Israelis shouldn't be surprised, because actually the Conservative Party, and you can go back, unfortunately we've had quite a number of prime ministers in recent years, but all of them have shown great support and knowledge and understanding of Israel's position. And you can go back from David Cameron as prime minister right through to Theresa May, Boris, short stay of Liz Truss.
Liz Truss, yeah.
But let me tell you something about Liz Truss. When she was foreign secretary, it was a golden moment for relations between Britain and Israel. She really gets it. And in fact, as you saw last week, she was also at the lunch. So the Israeli people shouldn't be surprised. Shouldn't be surprised. And by the way, the reason for this, there are many reasons, but one particular reason is the whole work that we've put in. This is people who've come and traveled to Israel, been with us, seen it, smelt it, touched it, and you can get that from people. They come on these visits and they get a better understanding, and that's what we have done over many years. And the cabinet, the reason 19 cabinet members, they came in their individual position, because this year was different, because people wanted to show solidarity to what's been going on. But to get literally most of the cabinet, I think we probably got more cabinet ministers at our lunch than go regularly to the cabinet meetings in Downing Street.
Mm-hmm. What is, the way I kind of look at it, I think for our American listeners who might not be familiar with what CFI is, it's almost, and you might not like this comparison, where I'm going, but like it's kind of like an AIPAC to an extent, right? But it's not a lobby. It's not a lobby, but the trips that you're referring to, it is similar to what AIPAC does with freshman congressmen by bringing them to Israel.
And it's the same. It's not rocket science. This is about creating people who may or may not reach the heights that you want them to reach at a time when they're on their road, or as we do similarly as AIPAC does, sometimes as candidates, before they're even on the road, before they're even thought of, they come and visit Israel. And it's two aspects. The one is visit, that's great, and see and understand. The other is the relationships you build. You spend 5 or 6 days with somebody and things happen. it's between you and between and them. They see it, they've experienced it, and you build those relationships. So that model is not rocket science, and APAC use it, and many others use it too.
I want to ask you, at the luncheon, Rishi Sunak really gave a great speech. One of I think the really interesting comments was when referring to the people who are chanting Free Palestine from the river to the sea as useful idiots, but he stood, really laid out and outlined how important it is for Israel to be able to defend itself and to act freely to defeat Hamas, and how the defeat of Hamas is important for the world and not just for the state of Israel. But you did kind of take him to task at the end about the IRGC, right? The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's primary military force that has yet to be designated or banned by the UK. For what reason, Lord Pollock?
Well, they're doing everything but. Look, the history is quite simple. I mean, it took us ages to get the government, British government, to prescribe Hezbollah, and they used to spew out was the word, all sorts of reasons why they couldn't do it for years. And interestingly, with Hezbollah, it took a British-born Muslim close friend who even honeymooned with his wife in Israel a number of years ago,
right?
Sajid Javid, who got it, who turned back to the officials and say, "No, hang on, these people are evil. These people are doing this and the other." And so it took a battle. And there are certain people who stick in their position. Most of the people you heard speak or you saw at the event and will generally support or understand that the IRGC are the daddy, and the others are all the sort of unruly children. And what's the point in keep attacking the children when you want to do the overall? Now, when Rishi stood for leadership against Liz Truss, both of them publicly said they support banning and prescribing the IRGC, and we're trying to push him on that. Now, what you don't see when you're a candidate for prime minister, and you only see when you are prime minister, I guess, are the intelligence stuff and the stuff that you and I and anybody listening to this don't see. And I'm still waiting to understand what is the actual reason why they're not doing it. It will happen eventually, and of course, last week they prescribed Hizbut Tahrir, which has taken them again so many years. They've done it, and I thanked the Prime Minister in front of everybody and just said, "Well, hang on, while you're on the roll,
don't forget about the IRGC.
There's one more to do." And some people found that awkward. Others expect it from me. I do it every year at the end of the lunch. There's something I will say, which is important. And if you've got an opportunity where you've got the Prime Minister standing here and the rest of the cabinet and all the supporters, I would have been a bit daft not to use that.
You take that opportunity, exactly. David Cameron said the other day, spoke about that maybe it's time for the recognition of the Palestinians as a state by Britain. What do you make of that comment?
He wrote an article which was published in the Mail on Sunday, where he laid out a vision. And this is the way he works, because when he was Prime Minister in 2014 and he came to the Knesset, and I was involved in helping him prepare the speech.
And let me just say, I remember that speech. It was remarkable.
So that speech, normally people come to the Knesset and they will berate or they'll say this and this is what you should do. And I said, no, what we need to do is you can express a vision. Don't come to the center of Jerusalem, to the heart of Jerusalem, and on your second visit to the place and start lecturing on what should be done and what shouldn't. That's not what the Mail on Sunday article did. Was give a vision. If Hamas is defeated, if the Palestinian the Gaza Strip is demilitarized, if that, and we all want to get to that place where two people can live, and if and at that point a Palestinian state becomes relevant in his mind. So what the BBC were the ones who took that, and you're a journalist, so you know how these things work. They took that bit out. The headline
And
was
that's what they blew up, exactly.
that Britain erected a blah blah, and that's not where Britain is at, because actually it's important, because Britain is seen rightly by Israel as a strong friend,
Yeah.
a sort of a sensible friend, candid friend sometimes, but the fact is they are a good friend. And if Britain start, so soon after October the 7th, almost looking as if we're rewarding the butchery, the rape, and everything else that went on, unspeakable things, that so soon after Britain might change a policy towards and recognize Palestinians. I don't know where the recognition is, and I don't know where the borders are, and I don't know where this place is. However, I think you may find in the next day or so there might be, as people, a lot of people, not everybody on your podcast will understand, when the Rashi comes out and there's a bit of explanation of what it is, and that this was taken from a longer piece. And I would refer people, go look up the Mail on Sunday. Actually, the whole article is different from what the headlines are saying. So I don't think there will be any immediate change of policy.
Early on in the war, and I think it was on October 17th or October 16th, you recited the prayer of Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, right? Of how we are all in this together, pretty much. A prayer that has really come to be symbolized to a large extent the fight to recover and retrieve the hostages, 136 who are still being held inside Gaza. You said it in Parliament, in the House of Lords.
I did it.
That was moving.
Well, a number of things. One is I wanted to give the Hansard people, for those that are Hansard, are people who transcribe everything that goes on. So I did it, quite a bit of it in Hebrew, to give the Hansard people a difficult time. But they they're used to me using Hebrew or sometimes even Yiddish words. Look, I stand up and very proud of who I am, and I was given this opportunity by David Cameron, who was the one who asked me to go in the House of Lords in 2015, with the words, "Go and do what you do and stand up for Israel." He told me that in 2015 when he was Prime Minister, and so I take his words literally, and I do so. Yeah, no, Achenu is a very moving short prayer. We sing it, as we all know, and I just thought it was right. People, you and I, we know what's going on. We have some knowledge. We have to always assume that those who are my colleagues in Parliament, why would they know? So last week I stood up and we were talking about the banning of Hizbut Tahrir, and I said, guys, you noble lords, you don't understand. You want to go to a Jewish school in North London today? You want to go to a synagogue? You've got to go through security. And we know that.
Right.
Why should they know? They don't know that. And I was explaining what was going on, and I gave them the story very short last week, literally a week after October 7th. I was in Jerusalem on October 7th, and by the time we got home, the stories going around North London. I have 5 grandchildren. My daughter called me. And I said this in Parliament last week. My daughter called so that they could understand. My daughter called me, and her question was, it was literally a week after October 7th. She said, "Dad, do you love your grandchildren?" I said, "Natasha, what is this question?"
Mm-hmm.
She said, "Well, should we send them to school?"
Wow.
That's a Jewish school, state-aided school in Finchley in North London. And that's my daughter who's saying it. You can imagine others. So I needed people in Parliament. I need them to understand what it is that we take, sadly, for granted. They have no clue. They have no clue. And that's, I think, very important.
Lord Stuart Pollock, I want to thank you so much for being with us, for your leadership, really, and for this interview. It was interesting, enlightening, and moving. So thank you so much for being
thank you.
JPPI.
Thank you for coming to the lunch, and next year as well, hopefully.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Dove and Gil, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining after the interview with Lord Stuart Pollock. And I want to start with you, Dove. Europe in this war, to some extent, it seems to me at least, has been of a different position than in the past. Rishi Sunak has obviously been very supportive. We hear it also from President Macron of France, obviously the Chancellor Scholz in Germany. But we haven't seen the same type of condemnations and calls for ceasefires and just in general across the board blanket European opposition to Israel like we have seen in recent years. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, the general position in Europe, in the EU, is there are three groups. One group is the Eastern country who understand the need for sovereignty. They understand Israel defense line and the need for identity of Israel, and they support Israel for a long time, for still they're part of the EU. And then we have the support group of Israel, which is Germany, Holland, and Denmark. And then we have the other country who normally don't support Israel. And as you say, today it was a bit different. We have seen that according to survey that have been done in France and England, that people in France, 72% of the people in France believe that what happened on October 7 in Israel could happen tomorrow in Paris, because there's a lot of growing minority. And the growing minority is a key issue of all anti-Semitism growth and surge that we have seen over the last 3 months. So when we have someone like Macron, for example, we have to deal with two tensions. One is the base of your electorate, or people who want to support you, and there is election at the EU in very soon. So these people, you know, they could support the far right, and he doesn't want to lose the far right to these people who could, because the far right is pro-Israel today in Europe. It's funny way, but it's a far right who have been the Nazism and so on to the support Israel. And so he doesn't want to lose these voters, so he wants to support them. He come to, for example, to visit Netanyahu and tell him that he's supporting Israel. On the other side, he's very afraid of the riots from the Muslim in France. We have something like 10 million in France, something like 15% of the population. And he's afraid of riots and all this population, so he has to be very balanced, and this is the way they use. So, but as you say, we have a much more support from England, from UK, from France, from other countries to Israel that we didn't see in the previous IDF operation.
And Gil, I mean, you know, to some extent, that gives Israel a sense of confidence that it also didn't have. I mean, I think, you know, obviously this connects also with the United States and the fact that President Biden has yet to call for a ceasefire. There's a lot of talk right now as we're recording this and speaking today, Thursday afternoon, of what might happen and what type of deal is on the table. The cabinet and the war cabinet and the security cabinet are both meant to meet later this evening to discuss the new proposal that would lead to a de-escalation and a move from the high intensity stage of the conflict to a lower intensity stage, and probably withdrawal of all forces, hopefully in exchange for the hostages who remain in Hamas captivity. But this is something new, right? 120 days into this conflict, pretty much. And Israel still, to a large extent, and I know there are people who say very different, right? You know, I read Thomas Friedman, and it seems like the whole world's come to an end, but really Israel has a lot more support than it's had in the past.
Absolutely.
There's been a very strange.
I just want to say one word, and I give you to talk, Gil, because I feel you have your own perspective on that. And just to say that very clearly, and we even see a decrease in the anti-Semitic incidents in the last months. I mean, so we have some kind of people accept the idea of what Israel is doing against Hamas in some way, and this is very inhabitual. It's something which is new.
Interesting.
But the political ethos, the European ethos is always desescalation and try to go for ceasefire and to stop. This is the regular John Lennon idea that we have to get rid of identity and collective identity, and to try to find solution and not to avoid fight. And as I explained before, the tension inside the local politics in France, England, and other countries, the best way for them to say we want a ceasefire, we want to stop this conflict because conflict is dangerous for us on the political local base.
So, Gil, to my question.
Certainly, I think you do see in the United States that general John Lennon fear of nationalism and of militancy. But I think there's been a fascinating disconnect in the whole conversation. The focus, both in Israel and the American Jewish community, let alone in the New York Times and the world of Thomas Friedman, is on the very, very small minority of pro-Palestinian protesters who have been making all kinds of mayhem on college campuses at great American icons. But if you look at the polls show that the overwhelming majority of the American people support Israel, not just generically, but specifically since October 7th. They identify what happened on October 7th as genocidal, meaning what Hamas did to Israel, not Israel's response, as genocidal. They say 69% in one poll said that they think that Israel's doing all it can to limit civilian harm. So what we're seeing is this weird megaphone effect where a small, well-organized minority of people is getting outsized attention, again, within the Jewish community too. And I think it's very important for the Jewish community in Israel to emphasize how many friends we have, not just how many enemies we have. Now, I don't want to minimize the fact that there also was, in the first 2 months, a spike of 377% of anti-Semitic incidents. I don't want to minimize the number of bloody incidents where we saw in Tulane University, someone had his nose bashed. Where we saw at Columbia University, somebody's finger was broken. We saw in Los Angeles, a computer science professor who was a pro-Palestinian guy knocked over a Jewish counter-protester. The guy hit his head and died. And each incident is unbelievable and unacceptable and truly anti-American and un-American, because so few American Jews have really experienced the kind of lethal anti-Semitism that we've seen in Europe. So there have been horrific moments, but I think it's really important to emphasize the fundamental support. And I think it goes back to what Dov was saying, that there's an understanding that this October 7th massacre was outside the boundaries of acceptable civilization. And it was a threat, not just to Israel, not just to the Jewish people, but to Western civilization.
And just to dovetail on that point, though, Gil, the anti-Semitism, I mean, it's, it's easy for us to say, okay, we still have friends, but on the other hand, we see like the report that came out this week by the Diaspora Affairs Ministry here in Israel that talks about a massive explosion of anti-Semitism. I mean, we didn't need the report. We all saw what's been happening, right? We had a discussion this week in the Institute talking about specifically what's been happening at Harvard since October 7th. And, as I'm watching and listening to the guest who was relaying to us what was happening, it was like just incident after incident. I start to feel, like a panic attack coming on, and I'm not even there. So there is still this crazy anti-Semitism that we really haven't experienced like this before.
No, there has been this surge, and there also is what American Jews are not used to, which is a real fear. John Podhoretz in Commentary wrote a very powerful article about both Israelis after October 7th having this fear that many of this generation never had before, and American Jews also, for the first time in their lives, feeling vulnerable, feeling fragile, feeling attacked. So we're living in very different realities, and we have to manage the different psychological realities and political realities. But what I want to emphasize, though, is the importance of emphasizing, especially to American foreign policymakers, and especially to the Biden administration, as they enter into a very difficult re-election campaign, that the core of the American people are with Israel. Because yes, they worry a little bit about Michigan because there's a group of Arabs who may not show up to vote. But what, they're going to start voting for Trump? So I think that there has to be a resurgence of the silenced majority. And one of the things that's been personally disappointing for me, watching what's going on in America in the last couple of months, is that where is this solid base of support for Israel? We don't hear enough Americans saying this is unacceptable when the Lincoln Memorial has blood splattered on it, red paint to symbolize blood, when they block traffic. And there have been 2 or 3 videos of guys getting up and saying, hey, we don't do this, we're New Yorkers. But there has to be more of a backlash against these assaults that are not just assaults on Israel, but assaults on American values and American institutions.
Dov, you were looking at that new anti-Semitism report that came up by the government and saw one of your conclusions was that takeaways was that it's a manifestation of an expression of hate against minorities, which is obvious. Yeah. But you have these, explain to us exactly what you mean by that, and what are the takeaways that we should be looking at? Well, in other words, where's this all coming from? It's more than just what we think.
Yeah. So there was this week a report published by the Ministry of Diaspora, and with the Jewish Agency for Israel, and also the World Jewish Zionist Organization, and they publish things that not surprising to us, but in some way it could be we can take something from that, and really as beyond the fact that we have this huge surge of anti-Semitic incidents all over the world. And I can give the numbers if interesting, figures if interesting for you. But I want to say something that we can maybe learn from Europe. And I think America is becoming Europe. I will tell you the way. And as you say, Gil, before, so there is a disconcerting 60% of Jewish students on US campuses report feeling insecure, a figure that rises to over 80% in Western Europe. But there is also a noticeable fortification of ties between Israel diaspora, between diaspora Jews and Israel. It's also, in some way, it's also some comfortable thing that we see, that we have this huge rally of 350,000 Jews attended on site, and additional 250,000 online, and so on, the march in France for 200,000 people and so on. But as you say, the point which is we can learn from Europe is very important, is regarding anti-Semitism as a visible tip of an iceberg, of a manifestation of minority identity expression. I will explain myself because I think it's brand new and we can learn from that something new. We have the Jews often bear the brunt, become an easy target for frustrated minority groups. So these people is mainly Arabs, it's mainly Muslim, as you say, Gil, before. It's a small group of people who are very, very excited against the Jews, but it's not only against the Jews, it's against the West. And what's happening? So these people are deep-seated grievances for discrimination from dominant majority. And what they want bigger space. They ask recognition on their identity in the public space. And so the Jews are, again, a canary in the mine. The Jews are an easy target, very easy to fight, and it's something that is supporting with a deep-rooted, regular anti-Semitism that we have in the West. And these people, so now they're requesting for more rights, and they're expressing it in a way that is possible now, because of Israel is perceived as colonization, because they see as a grievance that Israel is a sovereignty on the Muslim land and so on. But it's something that is really, this is not only against the Jews, it's against all the West. What they try to do is to ask for more multicultural, multi-ethnic societies. It is very clear in France and Britain. It's also very clear in Germany. It's very clear in Sweden, for sure, and Belgium. But it's also something that we have to think about when you look at who is acting behind a lot of action against the Jews on campuses in America.
I mean, Gil, that kind of leads me to the question of, do you think it's ever going to be possible that the world will understand what it is exactly that we're going through? In other words, where Europe is heading with the multiculturalism. In America, they would refer to as wokeism, right? It's every place with their different challenge. Even with the support that we have, will we ever get the understanding and the sympathy?
We thought so, right? We thought if nothing else,
1,200 Jews enough
1,200
to be
Jews
slaughtered, right?
Rape, right? Mass rape, and we heard the silence of the feminists. So I'm not going to spend too much time banking on our potential popularity, but I do think that we really have to look at things on two different levels. One is there really has been an interesting backlash. A year ago, we weren't talking about any serious backlash on American campuses against whatever you want to call it, wokeism or social justice warriors, or the fanaticism both of students and of faculty at many of the most elite universities. Now we're starting to see some of backlash. And it's not just Bill Ackman, the Harvard billionaire who happens to be Jewish, but also Ken Griffey, the other Harvard billionaire who isn't Jewish. Both of them are donors to Harvard, and both of them are saying, what are we paying for? What do you want us to do? So I think we are seeing something of a movement. But this is why I keep on emphasizing we have to tap into this silenced majority. More and more Americans are understanding that there's a conversation that's going on, especially in America as the presidential campaign starts, between Trumpian extremists and whatever you want to call them, super left, super woke, social justice warriors, pick your word. right? And there's this strange word game where as soon as you label them as one thing, if you're an opponent, they say, oh, it doesn't exist. And but they stick to that ideology. And I think it's very important that the Jewish community speak with a little more sophistication, look deep down at who our friends are and who our enemies are, start calling out our enemies, and also start saying thank you to our friends. And we have actually done a reversal. We're obsessed with our few enemies. We tend to ignore our friends. And because we might disagree with some of our friends, let's say on abortion issues, rather than saying, okay, I can ally with evangelicals, even if I disagree with them on abortion, but I totally agree with them on Israel, we say, no, because I disagree with you on a domestic issue, I'm not going to unite on a foreign policy issue. And I think we also have to step back and say, right now, there's a unique moment. Because Biden happens to be in office, and because Biden has been extraordinary in supporting Israel, with all our complaints about him maybe obsessing about the two-state solution, we have actually a bipartisan moment in Congress, which has been missing for a very long time. Had there been a Republican president, this Israel issue would have been much more polarized. But you have Republicans supporting support for Israel. You have Democrats supporting support for Israel. And we have to emphasize that as the real American spirit. But instead, we get caught in the squad who doesn't like us, and we get caught in this one who doesn't like us, partially because American Jews are obsessed with being popular on the left. We have to start being obsessed with being popular on the right side of history. Not right, not left, but the right and wrongs of history.
On that note, I want to thank Dov and Gil for joining us today. I want to thank Lord Stuart Pollock. I want to thank all of you, our viewers and listeners, for being with us again for another episode of JPPI's Inside Analysis, where you can find us Mondays and Thursdays. In the meantime, let's hope for a quiet weekend and a Shabbat Shalom from all of us here in Israel. Thank you very much.